I play 2-5 cash at Red Rock Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. I get a straight flush in the very first hand of the night and even make an insane bluff with 5-3 suited. In the very first hand of the night, I have ace-4 of hearts and raise to $15 under the gun. The under the gun 1 player makes a call and the under the gun 2 player 3-bets to $65. The button actually cold calls. When action folds back around to me, we are getting such a good price. Let's try to hit a flush. I make the call, and the under the gun 1 player makes the call as well. We flop middle pair with the nut flush draw as well as a straight flush draw. Action ends up checking around to the button who cold called the 3-bet pre, and he bets $110 into about 260. I just make the call and the rest of the players fold. The turn is the best possible card for our hand, the 3 of hearts. We now have a straight flush. To be honest, at the time, I thought I just had a normal flush. Nonetheless, I think this is a card that my opponent will definitely check back, so I think a lead is in order here. I bet about half pot, $215 into 480. My opponent makes a call and the river comes the deuce of clubs. This really isn't a great card because I am way more likely to have sets here versus my opponent. They are more likely to have overpairs like pocket 10s plus. With that said, we have about $600 left behind and we are going to try to get paid the maximum. We go all in for what ends up being about 578. My opponent thinks it over and eventually calls.
Wow. I hand on 4.
As you heard, we not only win an over $2,000 pot, but also a $100 high hand bonus. What a sick hand to start the session. In the next hand, we have ace-9 off and the button raises to $20. We are in the small blind and put in the 3-bet for $60. My opponent makes a call and the flop comes 9-4 deuce, 2 hearts. With top pair, top kicker, I put in a bet for $70 and my opponent makes a call. The turn is the 6 of diamonds. My opponent in this hand is a very old man and very tight. For this reason, I decide to slow down and check. They put in a bet for $300 into about 260. Versus basically any other player, I would just have to call here. But versus this opponent, I can just fold. Realistically, they are never doing this as a bluff. At the time, I was thinking they just had an overpair and we were probably just beat. I end up making an exploitative fold versus this specific opponent. And it turns out we were right, as my opponent will later show pocket 4s for a flopped set. Happy to get away from this one for cheap. In the next hand, I have pocket 9s and there is an under the gun limp for $5. The under the gun 1 player raises to $20 and the under the gun 2 player makes the call. I could make the overcall on the button, but I decide to thin the field out and 3-bet for $85. I really like this sizing because if we get 4-bet, we can get away for cheap. Both of the pre-flop raisers end up making the call and the flop comes king 8-7, all spades. Action checks to me and I decide to put in a down bet of $70. I am going to have a lot of king X in my range when I 3-bet pre, and there's a lot of good turns as I have a spade and backdoor straight draw. Just the under the gun 2 player decides to make the call. The turn is a deuce of spades. Our marginal middle pair now improves to a flush, but not a very strong one, so when my opponent checks, I decide to check back. The river comes the 5 of diamonds. My opponent checks once again, and at this point they only have about $300 left in their stack as they started with about 500. The question is to go for value or not. 9 of spades is not very strong, but really if my opponent had the 10 of spades or better, they would probably go for value by now. At the time, I did not piece this together and I ended up checking back, which I think is not that bad, but I definitely missed some value as my opponent shows ace king off with no spade. I could have definitely put in a 1/3 type size bet and gotten a call. Speaking of ace king, this is what we have in this next hand. We raise to $15 under the gun. There are 3 other calls and the flop comes ace 5 for 2 diamonds. Being out of position, I decide to start with a check with strong intentions to check raise. Unfortunately, action ends up checking through. The turn comes the 7 of clubs. This time I bet $45 and just the hijack makes a call. The river comes the 5 of hearts. With $150 in the pot, I put in a bet for $100. I think I'll often get called by a worse ace here, but this is not what happens as my opponent ends up jamming for $325 total. I can't imagine that my opponent would be doing this with worse here, here, so I make the fold. They do end up showing their hand to me, which is a turned set and rivered boat, pocket sevens. We really should have bet the flop. In the next hand, I have ace nine of diamonds, and there is an early position raise to $25. We call in the big blind. The flop comes ace, six, five, two clubs, one diamond. We check, and my opponent bets $35. I'm not going anywhere with top pair and backdoor diamonds. I make the call. The turn is a six of hearts. I check, and my opponent continues and bets $65 this time. We are not feeling great about this spot, as my opponent has been pretty tight the entire game, but we make the call. The river comes a queen of clubs. I check, and my opponent checks back. Am I good? No, my opponent shows ace king. As suspected, we were beat all along. This next hand is pretty sick, so strap in. We have 5-3 of spades and raise to $15 in the low jack. Now look, I know this is a little bit out of line, but I only have about 2 hours to play in this session, so I'm getting out of line. The small blind ends up 3-betting us to $60. Now I didn't open this hand to fold to a 3-bet. I make the call. The flop comes 10, 6, deuce, 1 spade. We flop a gut shot and backdoor spade draw. My opponent continues and bets half pot, $60. I consider a raise here with the possibility of a lot of good turn cards, but I decide I want to stay balanced, as if I had a set, I definitely would not raise here. I just make the call, and the turn comes to 3 of diamonds. This time, with about 240 in the pot, my opponent bets 160. Now at this point, I think all 3 options of call, fold, or raise are on the table. Being that this opponent has been tight and I've seen him make big folds already in this session, I think I can get a bluff through here. If I raise here and then jam the river, they are certainly the type that could fold an overpair. With this in mind, I put in a raise for 390. This is less than a 2.5x raise and is designed to look pretty strong. If my opponent makes a call here, they will have about $700 left, and I would be jamming for that amount into about 1k. With that in mind, I probably should have gone a bit smaller than 390, but it's fine. My opponent does end up making the call, and the river comes a 10 of spades. They check, and this is a very bad card. We are no longer likely to have one of our biggest possible value hands, that is pocket tens. And I think the chances that my opponent will fold an overpair here now go down significantly. With this in mind, I also have to consider if my 3 could ever be good here. And I think it sometimes could. My opponent can have some semi-bluffs himself, like 8-7 suited or diamonds. I decide to give up and check back, and we hear this.
You baseline? I have a 3.
Wow. You're playing poker now.
That's right, we are playing poker now, as I show a 3 and am good. My opponent had ace high. My best guess is they had ace x of diamonds. This was a fun hand. In the last hand of the night, I have jack 9 of clubs. There is an under the gun limp for $5 and an under the gun 2 raised to $25. We just make the call on the cutoff, and the under the gun player ends up folding. The flop comes as amazing as possible. Jack 8 4 2 clubs. My opponent bets $25 and I just make the call. The turn is the ace of clubs. We now have a flush. This does not slow down my opponent, however, who continues and bets $65. If we had a weaker flush here, I think I could certainly raise, but with a jack-eye flush, I'm just going to make the call. The river comes a queen of diamonds. This time, my opponent slows down and checks. I go for a greedy maximum value size for $275. My opponent, however, will quickly fold. I'm guessing they really didn't have much. After all this run good, it's now time to cash out and watch Tom Cruise on the big screen. Alright guys, as you saw, the session went very well. We were in for 1,000, cash out for like 2,900, so like a $1,900 profit. I actually forgot to cash in my bonus, so I'm gonna go do that. The 5-3 suited bluff, that was pretty sick. The straight flush, obviously, in the beginning of the night was very sick. And yeah, man, we obviously ran well within the 2-hour period that we're here. And now it's time to see Top Gun. Let's go. You can't really tell in the video, but the amazing thing about 4D is that it's literally like a roller coaster. You can feel the wind in your face, and your seat will actually move as Tom Cruise pulls up. Honestly, the most fun I've ever had at the movies.
Absolute cinema experience. 4DX.
Yeah. Time for a movie review. All right, guys, we're leaving the casino. What'd you think of the movie?
It was crazy, man. Awesome.
Crazy. It was sick. 4D, you guys saw. I recorded a little bit when I was in there.
Oh, yeah, I wish I did.
It was so sick. If you see Top Gun, try to see it in 4D if you have a theater near you. I mean, it's an unreal experience.
Yeah.
If you guys enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Peace!